Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. For context, I'd spent 5 years saving every penny I could for a down payment on a house with some land. My job as a graphic designer allowed me to work remotely, and I'd always dreamed of having space for a proper home studio away from the cramped apartment I'd been renting in the city. After countless viewings and multiple rejected offers, I finally found the perfect place. It was a modest 3-bedroom farmhouse sitting on just over 2 acres of land about 30 minutes outside the city. The previous owners were an elderly couple who had lived there for nearly 40 years but were downsizing to move closer to their children. The house needed work, sure, but it had good bones, and most importantly, it had a detached garage that would make the perfect studio space. The sale went smoothly. We closed on a Tuesday, and by Thursday I had the keys in hand and was ready to start my new life. The first week was spent cleaning and making small repairs before the big move. I was staying at the property overnight, but still going back and forth to my apartment to pack and prepare. The first time I noticed my neighbor watching me was on day 3. I was replacing the front door lock when I felt eyes on me. Looking up, I spotted a middle-aged woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair standing at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, staring at me with narrowed eyes. When our gazes met, she didn't smile or wave, just continued staring for a few uncomfortable seconds before walking briskly back to her house across the street. "Friendly," I muttered to myself, returning to my task. The next day, I was unloading some tools from my car when the same woman walked by, slowing down as she passed. "You've been coming and going a lot," she called out, not bothering with a greeting. "What exactly are you doing with the Johnsons' house?" I straightened up and offered what I hoped was a friendly smile. "I bought it from them. Just getting some work done before moving in fully." She looked me up and down, taking in my paint-splattered jeans and worn t-shirt. "You bought it?" The disbelief in her voice was impossible to miss. "Yes, closed last Tuesday," I replied, trying to keep my tone even despite the implied insult. She pursed her lips. "The Johnsons didn't mention selling to someone like you." With that cryptic statement, she continued her walk, leaving me standing there with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Someone like me? What was that supposed to mean? I was in my early 30s, dressed for renovation work. Was it my age? My casual appearance? I couldn't tell, but something about our interaction left me feeling uneasy. I brushed it off and continued with my work. Over the next few days, I noticed her watching me from her windows or taking detours on her walks to pass by my property. Sometimes she'd have a phone in her hand, and once I was almost certain she took a photo of me working in the yard. Still, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just curious about the new neighbor. Then came the day that would forever cement her in my mind as Karen. I was in my front yard, removing some overgrown bushes that were blocking the windows. It was a hot day, and I was sweaty and dirty from the work. My old pickup truck was parked in the driveway, loaded with yard waste to take to the dump later. I heard the familiar click-clack of heels on pavement before I saw her. When I looked up, Karen was standing at the edge of my property, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, phone clutched in her manicured hand. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice that suggested she was used to being obeyed. "What do you think you're doing?" I wiped my brow with the back of my hand. "Just removing these bushes. They're blocking the light, and some of them are dead anyway." "Those bushes have been part of this neighborhood's aesthetic for decades," she said, as if I'd committed some cardinal sin. "You can't just come in here and start destroying things." I took a deep breath. "Actually, I can. This is my property now, and I'm improving it." She laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Your property? Please. I know for a fact the Johnsons would never sell their beloved home to some random person who clearly can't even afford proper landscaping equipment." I stood up fully now, rake in hand. "Look, I don't know what your problem is, but I bought this house fair and square. If you don't believe me, that's your issue, not mine." Her face hardened. "I've been watching you coming and going at odd hours, sleeping here sporadically, changing locks, now tearing up the landscaping. It's obvious what you're doing." "What exactly do you think I'm doing?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Squatting," she spat the word. "Taking advantage of the fact that the Johnsons moved out. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we don't tolerate people illegally occupying homes." I couldn't help it. I laughed. The accusation was so absurd that for a moment I thought she must be joking, but the dead serious expression on her face quickly sobered me up. "That's ridiculous. I'm not squatting. I own this house and land. I have all the paperwork to prove it." "Save your lies," she snapped. "I'm on the neighborhood watch, and I've been in contact with several neighbors who share my concerns. If you don't vacate this property immediately, I'm calling the police." The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. This woman truly believed I was some kind of criminal. Or at least, she was pretending to believe it. Either way, this was escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. "Look," I said, attempting to sound reasonable, "I'm happy to show you my deed or closing documents if it will put your mind at ease. There's no need to involve the police in what's clearly just a misunderstanding." Her eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "I don't need to see your forged documents. I've seen enough to know what's going on here. You have 30 minutes to pack up and leave, or I'm calling 911. With that ultimatum delivered, she turned on her heel and marched back across the street to her immaculately landscaped property. I stood there for a moment, rake still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to rush inside and grab my closing documents to prove her wrong. Another part wanted to simply ignore her and continue with my work. After all, I knew the truth. I had nothing to hide or fear from the police. In the end, I decided to continue working. If she wanted to waste police resources on her misguided crusade, that was her choice. I had permits for the work I was doing and all the documentation proving my ownership. Let her call. Almost exactly 30 minutes later, as I was loading the last of the uprooted bushes into my truck, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. I sighed, putting down my work gloves and taking a long swig from my water bottle. This was really happening. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. 4 officers stepped out, looking cautious but not overtly aggressive. Karen emerged from her house at almost the same moment, practically jogging across the street with a triumphant expression. "That's him, officers!" she called out, pointing dramatically in my direction. "That's the squatter I told you about. He's been here for days, destroying property and refusing to leave." One of the officers, a tall man with a serious expression, approached me while his colleagues hung back slightly. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, his tone professional. "We received a call about a possible trespassing situation at this address. Mind if I ask what you're doing here?" Before I could answer, Karen interjected, "He's lying about owning the property. The real owners are an elderly couple who moved away just last week. He's taking advantage of their absence." The officer held up a hand to silence her. "Ma'am, please, let me conduct my investigation." He turned back to me. "Sir?" I met his gaze steadily. "Officer, my name is OP. I purchased this property from the couple she's referring to. We closed on the sale last Tuesday, and I've been here doing some renovations before fully moving in. I have all the documentation inside." The officer nodded. "I'd like to see that documentation if you don't mind." "Of course," I replied. "Would you like to come inside, or should I bring it out here?" "Inside is fine," he said. As we walked toward the front door, Karen tried to follow, but another officer gently blocked her path. "Ma'am, please wait here while we sort this out." "But I need to make sure he's not showing you fake documents," she protested. "We know how to verify legal documents," the officer assured her with what seemed like thinning patience. Inside, I led the first officer to the kitchen table where I'd set up a makeshift office. I pulled out a folder containing my closing documents, deed, homeowner's insurance, and even the receipt for the new locks I'd installed. "Here's everything," I said, spreading the papers out. "The deed, proof of sale, all of it. I also have digital copies on my phone, and I can call my real estate agent if you need additional verification." The officer examined the papers carefully, occasionally glancing up at me. After a few minutes, he pulled out his phone and made a call. I could hear him confirming details from my documents with someone at the station. When he hung up, his demeanor had noticeably relaxed. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. OP, he said. "Your ownership of this property checks out. I apologize for the disturbance." "It's not your fault," I said. "You were just doing your job." We walked back outside where Karen was pacing impatiently, the other officers keeping a watchful eye on her. "Well?" she demanded as soon as she saw us. The officer who had reviewed my documents addressed her directly. "Ma'am, I've confirmed that this individual is indeed the legal owner of this property. All his documentation is in order, and our records confirm the recent sale." Karen's mouth fell open in disbelief. "That's impossible! There must be some mistake!" "There's no mistake," the officer said firmly, "and I need to inform you that making false reports to emergency services is a serious offense. In the future, I strongly suggest you verify your facts before calling 911 for non-emergency matters." Karen's face flushed red, either from embarrassment or anger. It was hard to tell. But he doesn't look like someone who could afford this property, and the way he's been acting, coming and going at all hours—" "Ma'am," the officer cut her off, A person's appearance or schedule has no bearing on their property rights. Mr. OP has legally purchased this home, and he has every right to come and go as he pleases and make whatever legal modifications he wishes to his property. I could see several neighbors had come out of their homes to watch the spectacle. Some were trying to be discreet about it, pretending to check their mail or water plants. Others were openly staring. I felt a mix of embarrassment and vindication. Karen wasn't backing down. Well, if he really is the owner, then he needs to follow the neighborhood standards. Those bushes he's tearing out are part of the original landscaping plan. One of the other officers stepped forward now. Ma'am, unless there's an HOA with specific bylaws regarding landscaping, which we haven't been made aware of, a property owner can make whatever changes they wish to their own yard, provided they comply with local ordinances. There isn't an official HOA, Karen admitted reluctantly. But we have neighborhood standards that everyone follows. Informal standards aren't legally enforceable, the officer explained patiently. Now, we've established that Mr. OP is the legal owner, and no laws are being broken. We need to be on our way, and I strongly advise you to leave Mr. OP alone to enjoy his property in peace. Karen stood there, practically vibrating with indignation. For a moment, I thought she might continue arguing, but something in the officer's expressions must have warned her against it. Without another word, she turned and stalked back to her house, slamming her front door hard enough that we could hear it from across the street. The lead officer turned to me. Sorry about this, sir. If you have any further issues, don't hesitate to call the non-emergency line. Thank you, officers, I said. I appreciate you being thorough and professional. As they prepared to leave, I had a thought. Officer, just out of curiosity, what exactly did she tell the dispatcher when she called 911? The officer's expression darkened slightly. She reported an aggressive squatter who was threatening her and destroying property. She implied there was potential for violence. I was shocked. That's completely false. We're aware of that now, he said. And as I mentioned, false reporting is something we take seriously. Consider this incident documented. After the police left, I stood in my yard for a moment, processing what had just happened. Several neighbors were still watching, and I could feel their eyes on me. Rather than slink away in embarrassment, I decided to take a different approach. I smiled and waved at the onlookers. Hi there, I'm OP, the new owner. Just doing some renovations before I fully move in. Nice to meet you all. A few neighbors waved back hesitantly. One older gentleman actually walked over and introduced himself. Don't mind her, he said quietly, nodding toward Karen's house. She's been like that since she moved in 5 years ago. Thinks she runs the place. Thanks for the heads up, I replied. Over the next few days, I continued my work on the property, but with a new awareness of Karen's eyes constantly watching. Rather than let it bother me, I decided to use it to my advantage. I made sure all my permits were prominently displayed in windows. When deliveries arrived, I greeted the drivers loudly and cheerfully, often mentioning how excited I was about the renovations to my new home. A week after the police incident, my real estate agent stopped by to see how I was settling in. As we chatted in the front yard, I noticed Karen watching from her window. An idea formed in my mind. Would you mind taking a photo of me in front of the house? I asked my agent. For memories, you know, first home and all that. My agent happily obliged, taking several pictures of me standing proudly in front of my new home, holding up the keys. I made sure we were positioned so that Karen's house was visible in the background, knowing she was watching. That weekend, I decided it was time to properly introduce myself to the neighborhood. I printed out simple invitations to a small housewarming gathering and hand-delivered them to each house on the street, including Karen's. Most neighbors seemed pleased by the gesture, and a few even apologized for the misunderstanding the previous week. When I reached Karen's door, I took a deep breath before knocking. She opened it just enough to peer out, her expression souring when she saw me. "What do you want?" she asked coldly. "I'm inviting the neighbors over for a small gathering next Saturday," I said, holding out the invitation. "I thought it would be nice to properly introduce myself to everyone." She stared at the invitation as if it might bite her. "I'm busy that day." "That's a shame," I said pleasantly. "The invitation has my phone number on it in case you change your mind. Also, I want you to know that I understand there was a misunderstanding last week, and I bear no ill will. I'm looking forward to being neighbors for many years to come." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously at my friendly tone, clearly uncertain how to respond to someone who wasn't retaliating against her hostility. "Whatever," she finally said, taking the invitation and closing the door without another word. The day of the gathering arrived, and to my delight, most of the neighbors showed up. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, with people bringing small gifts and dishes to share. I gave informal tours of the house, explaining my renovation plans and listening to stories about the neighborhood's history. Karen, predictably, did not attend. But several times during the gathering, I noticed her curtains twitching as she observed the festivities from across the street. As people mingled in the backyard, enjoying drinks and snacks, I overheard snippets of conversation about Karen. It seemed her false police report about me was just the latest in a long string of entitled behavior that had alienated many in the neighborhood. One neighbor confided that Karen had reported their teenage son for suspicious activity when he was simply washing their car in the driveway. Another mentioned how she had tried to dictate what colors they could paint their house, despite the lack of an HOA. By the end of the gathering, I had formed genuine connections with several neighbors and gained valuable insight into the community dynamics. More importantly, I had established myself as a reasonable, friendly addition to the neighborhood in direct contrast to Karen's unfounded accusations. Over the following months, I threw myself into transforming the property. The detached garage became a beautiful studio space with large windows that let in natural light. I replaced the dead bushes with native plants that attracted butterflies and birds. The house itself got a fresh coat of paint in a warm, inviting color. Throughout this process, Karen continued her silent surveillance, but never directly confronted me again. I made a point of being meticulously careful about following all local ordinances and keeping the property immaculate, giving her nothing legitimate to complain about. About 3 months after moving in, I was working in my front garden when a car pulled into my driveway. To my surprise, it was the elderly couple who had sold me the house, coming to see how the renovations were progressing. They were delighted with the changes I'd made, saying the place looked better than it had in years. As we chatted, I noticed Karen watching from her porch. Making a spontaneous decision, I waved her over. "Karen, come meet the previous owners." She hesitated visibly, but with the couple turning to look in her direction, social pressure forced her to approach. "You remember the couple who lived here for 40 years, right?" I said innocently. "They were just saying how happy they are that I've been taking such good care of their beloved home." The couple, unaware of the subtext, enthusiastically agreed, going into detail about how pleased they were with my stewardship of the property they had loved for so long. Karen managed a tight smile and a few pleasantries before excusing herself. As she walked away, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of triumph. Not only had I firmly established my legitimate ownership, but I'd done it without stooping to her level of pettiness and false accusations. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the city commending my property for beautification efforts and sustainable landscaping practices. I framed it and placed it prominently on my front porch, visible to anyone walking by. 6 months after the police incident, I was fully settled in and thriving. My home studio was bringing in more design work than ever. The house renovations were nearly complete, and I had formed genuine friendships with several neighbors. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to have lost much of her influence in the neighborhood. People were less inclined to listen to her complaints now that they had seen her credibility damaged so publicly. The final victory came when I was elected to the neighborhood council, a voluntary position that Karen had held for the past 3 years. I hadn't even campaigned for it, simply accepting when a neighbor nominated me. Karen had run again, of course, but received minimal support. The look on her face when the results were announced at the community meeting was worth every moment of stress she had caused me. Looking back now, I realized that the most effective response to Karen's entitlement wasn't anger or retaliation, but simply living well and proving her wrong through my actions rather than my words. I didn't need to stoop to her level of making false accusations or creating conflict. By remaining calm, proving my legitimacy, and becoming a valued member of the community, I taught her the most powerful lesson of all. Whether she learned from it or not, I had truly come out on top. So here I sit, in my beautiful home studio on my legally owned property, watching the sunset over my land. Karen still lives across the street, but these days her curtains remain still when I'm outside. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but simply thriving in spite of those who tried to stand in your way. Anyway, thank you for watching.